Almost immediately after police arrested an undocumented immigrant for the murder of Mollie Tibbetts, the case turned into a political hot-button issue. The controversy got another boost Wednesday when President Trump released a video linking the case to U.S. immigration policy.
This is one instance of many. We have tremendous crime trying to come through the borders. We have the worst laws anywhere in the world. Nobody has laws like the United States. They are strictly pathetic.
In the video, President Trump goes on to push for increased funding for the proposed border wall between Mexico and the United States. Meanwhile, the suspect, Cristhian Rivera, had his first court appearance Wednesday. Prosecutors charged him with first-degree murder, and the judge ordered him held on $5 million bond. Adriana Diaz has more on the case and the political controversy.
Mollie Tibbetts' alleged murderer shuffled into the courtroom in silence, wearing a prison jumpsuit and headphones for Spanish translation.
Mr. Rivera, you have been charged with murder in the first degree.
24-year-old Cristhian Bahena Rivera is originally from Mexico. Federal officials tell us he's an undocumented immigrant. According to the affidavit, Rivera told investigators he followed Tibbetts as she was jogging in Brooklyn, Iowa, July 18th. When Tibbetts said, "I'm going to call the police," he panicked, got angry, then his memory, quote, blocked until he remembered finding Tibbetts in his trunk, bleeding from the head. He says he left her body down this road in a cornfield.
Rivera worked here at Yerraby Farms. It's a small dairy farm with about 10 employees.
Dane Lang owns the farm with his father, Craig, a local Republican leader. Rivera worked for them for almost 4 years.
What we learned in the last 24 hours is that our employee was not who he said he was.
Lang said Rivera used a fake ID to pass a government screening for employment, but he admitted the farm used the wrong verification system.
I'm very sorry.
The case has sparked outrage from lawmakers. Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley.
It is the duty of this senator and every other senator to act to prevent further tragedies like this one.
And last night, the president said this.
Should have never happened. The immigration laws are such a disgrace.
Rivera's attorney, Alan Richards, says the president shouldn't make the case political.
Why do you believe that our coverage has been unfair of your client?
If you spent half as much time talking about somebody being presumed innocent until the facts are out there, I think would be a great help.
Tibbetts' family wasn't in the courtroom, but they did release a statement. They didn't touch on the political discussion. They said, "Our hearts are broken. We thank all of those from around the world who have sent their thoughts and prayers for our girl." The suspect, Rivera, will be back in court August 31st. If convicted, he faces life without parole. Tanya.
Adriana Diaz, thank you. And for more on this, I want to bring in Politico reporter Louis Nelson. He is in Washington. Louis, thanks for being with us. As we get closer to midterm elections, Louis, do you think that we're going to hear more about immigration and border security from Republicans? Will this particular case come up again?
You know, it really wouldn't surprise me if it did. The president talks often, especially in 2016 on the campaign trail, would talk often about Kate's Law, the law in San Francisco, I believe, having to do with the murder of a woman by an undocumented immigrant. This case sort of checks a lot of those same boxes for the president, and this is a president who has previously not been shy at all about making political hay out of a horrible tragedy. This is a president who, after that nightclub shooting in Orlando at that gay nightclub, his reaction was to go on Twitter and to write, "Appreciate the congrats about being right on radical Islamic terrorism." So it wouldn't be out of character at all for the president to continue to make this an issue and to make this specific murder an issue. And I think immigration and border security sort of writ large, I think Republicans do feel like that is somewhat of a winning issue for them as we get closer to November.
You know, this is obviously such an awful crime, a terrible case, and everyone's hearts are broken. We've been following this case so closely for a while. But do Republicans perhaps risk alienating some voters by politicizing the Mollie Tibbetts case?
Well, I think the Republicans can sort of take a little bit of, or can use the president somewhat as a shield, because the president certainly isn't going to be shy about politicizing this issue. He's already done it And if I were a betting man, I would bet that he will probably do it again at the next one of these big rallies that he has. I suspect that the murder of Mollie Tibbetts, the alleged murder of Mollie Tibbetts, is likely to come up again with the president. And I think as long as Republicans running in congressional races, Senate races, House races don't go out on a limb further than the president does, the president will take the flak, and they will, for the most part, sort of be shielded by him. That would be my guess.
Right. All right. So, Louis, switching topics now to Michael Cohen's plea deal. The White House is standing by its argument that the president did nothing wrong, but a number of senators from both parties have expressed concern over Cohen's revelations that President Trump directed him to make a $130,000 hush money payment to Stormy Daniels. Let's listen.
We're in the middle of the iceberg right now, given how many people so close to the president are on their way to jail.
Michael Cohen's admitted crimes helped Donald Trump win the election. And going forward, if the president were to pardon Michael Cohen or Paul Manafort, I think that would constitute a significant attack on the rule of law in America.
And I hope that we don't see, people celebrating or doing any very partisan, taking very partisan positions. This is not a good day for our country. This is not a good day for our nation.
So, Louis, no one is speaking impeachment yet, but is the White House worried about the mounting concerns from lawmakers on Capitol Hill?
I suspect that they're not. I think in that clip you just showed, it was 3 different Democratic senators, and obviously I don't think there's anything new from those particular lawmakers in speaking out against the president and expressing concern about his particular about the sort of swirl of legal issues surrounding him. There hasn't been a real seismic shift on the Republican side of the Senate as to what they think about the president and how the developments of the last 36, 24 hours, whatever it's been, how those developments impact what they think about the president. Republican senators who are already sort of prone to be critical of President Trump, people like Ben Sasse of Nebraska or Susan Collins of Maine, were critical or have been critical, continued to be critical of the president as a result of these 2 guilty plea, or a conviction and a guilty plea from Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen. Other lawmakers, people who have been more, maybe not loyal is the right word, but people who have been more staunch supporters of the president have sort of stayed in that camp. People like Lindsey Graham, Richard Burr, John Cornyn, things like that have sort of stuck behind the president. And so at this point, I don't expect that there's a ton of concern, at least from the White House, in terms of losing support in the Senate. Or in the House, for that matter, on the Republican side.
So do you think the White House is not at all concerned about what more Michael Cohen might tell the special counsel?
So I think concern about Michael Cohen is a completely different matter, and I do think there is some concern. People from, sort of inside the president's orbit have said as much, that Michael Cohen sort of caught the White House off guard a little bit, and that this is a different sort of problem, a different sort of trouble than what Paul Manafort could create, or what or what sort of some of the other buckets of the Mueller investigation could create. I think partially because there's less of a grip from the White House and from Trump's legal team and sort of Trump allies as to what exactly Michael Cohen what sort of information he's in possession of, the depth and scope of his knowledge of the president over the more than a decade that they've worked together, I think holds a lot of unknowns for the president and his team.
And Louis, Michael Cohen's attorney, Lanny Davis, said that Cohen would never accept a presidential pardon. He also said his client is eager to tell the truth. So that sort of message is clearly aimed at the White House as well. It's interesting because it's a strategy that is the polar opposite of the one that Manafort is taking. Which one do you think will end up being more successful?
Boy, that's sort of the $1 million question, right? I think that remains to be seen. Although it's not clear, or it is very clear today that the president, which tack the president prefers, that Trump came out on Twitter today and said, he feels horrible for Paul Manafort, and that he was impressed with him, that he didn't flip and work with prosecutors the way that Michael Cohen did.
Right, absolutely. Now, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders rejected questions about a potential pardon for Paul Manafort, but we did see the president write on Twitter, as we've been discussing, that Manafort is, quote, a brave man. Mm-hmm. So if the president were to pardon Manafort, which is something that's clearly still on the table, what message would that send to Congress? And do you think that would almost anger Democrats more than what Michael Cohen has revealed?
I suspect that it would really anger a lot of people on Capitol Hill, not just Democrats, but I think a good number of Republicans as well. Whether or not that would be the thing that would sort of spur Republicans into action when so many other things have not, I think is an open question, and would depend on the circumstances and things like that. But already you've seen the White House and defenders of the president on Capitol Hill sort of lay the groundwork for disassociating this whole Manafort conviction from the president, say, look, this has nothing to do with Russia, this has nothing to do with collusion, that this has nothing to do with the president at all, even though, Paul Manafort was the president's campaign chairman, effectively his campaign manager for several crucial months, was part of the Republican National Committee platform committee that helped rewrite the Republican platform to make it friendlier towards Russia. There's a lot of, Paul Manafort was in very deep with the Trump campaign and with the Republican National Committee. And I think that's the distance you're seeing the White House and defenders of the president try to create now as Manafort wraps up one trial and then heads into another trial.
Right. I think it's really hard for the White House to paint him as a very sympathetic figure. The tax fraud that he was convicted of has robbed taxpayers of a significant amount of money. It's sort of hard to paint him as sympathetic, but that aside, on the same day as Manafort and Cohen convictions, sitting Republican Congressman Duncan Hunter was indicted. And just 2 weeks ago, Congressman Chris Collins was also indicted. Does this boost Democrats that are pushing an anti-corruption message ahead of the election?
I suspect you will probably see Democrats, to the extent that they try to push a nationwide message. I suspect that you will see them try to attack Republicans, and especially, the very pro-Trump Republicans, as, not really draining the swamp, but sort of being emblematic of the swamp. The first member of Congress to endorse President Trump for president was Chris Collins. He was indicted last week or the week before, a few days ago anyways. Duncan Hunter, the second congressman to endorse the president, was indicted earlier this week. The third member of Congress to endorse the president was Jeff Sessions. He's Attorney General, and he's already in a lot of hot water with the president. The details of of Duncan Hunter's indictment are sort of particularly not scandalous, but they're some real interesting and sort of funny details in there that I think will be easy for Democrats to try to draw attention to if that's the path they try to take.
Indeed. All right, Lewis Nelson, thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you.